Continuing on from our series about Foot Locker and the athlete's foot, today I'm going to look at substantive testing. And while in our previous video we looked at sales, this time I'm going to look at inventory. And when I look at inventory, I'm actually going to divide my inventory testing into two groups. The first group, I'll draw a little line down here. I'm going to be looking at inventory around the stores. And then I'm also going to look at inventory from the warehouse perspective. Okay. All right. So let's start with the assertions, and the assertions are going to be the same no matter what we're looking at here. It's going to be existence, we're going to have valuation, we're going to have completeness, rights and obligations, and also, along with valuation, we're going to have allocation. All right, so I'm going to switch to a pen so I've got a little bit more room here. So for our existence procedures, we want to make sure that all of the inventory in the stores really does exist. So to do that, we're going to perform a stock take. And so a stock take is simply vouching inventory records to physical items. And we're going to need to check size as well as model. Now for our stores, we're going to do this in the individual store, but we also need to do the same procedure from a warehouse perspective. For our valuation and allocation, we want to make sure that all of the inventory there is appropriately valued. Now, that could be done in a couple of different ways. I could do an analytical procedure of inventory turnover to identify slow-moving stock. And that slow-moving stock is more likely to be obsolete. Another procedure, and we can do this both at the warehouse and at the store level, would be to recalculate value of inventory by multiplying inventory records by the purchase price of the individual items. All right, let's look at completeness. Now, completeness is making sure that every inventory item is recorded within our stores. So we can trace inventory items to inventory records. All right. Now, another way to do that as well by analytical procedure might be to work backwards. So we know about the management accounting formula: opening inventory plus purchases less sales equals closing. And instead, I can probably work backwards. All right, so I can take this information, opening plus purchase plus minus sales is closing, and then match that to our inventory records. And that will give me an idea over the entire company whether inventory records look complete. And we could do that same analytical procedure can tell us whether inventory might be overstated or understated. Now, rights and obligations is about ownership. So in this instance, when does the store take possession? So we might vouch inventory items to documentation showing when goods were delivered to the store. Now, when we come to rights and obligations from our warehouse side, it's going to be about when the goods were received by the warehouse. So we're going to need to, firstly, let's look at some business contracts. So examine supplier contracts to determine when the athlete's foot, that's the TAF, takes ownership of inventory. And that could be because in some instances, when the inventory leaves the factory from Nike or Puma or Adidas or ASIC, we might take ownership when the goods leave the factory. And if they leave a factory in China, it takes 2 weeks to get here, then we take ownership then. Or we might take ownership when delivery is made. So based on what this supplier contract says, we would then again vouch that same inventory item to make sure that goods were received at the appropriate time. Now going back here, I noticed that I haven't filled in existence for my inventory. Now in the stores, I could probably vouch every single item, but in the warehouse, there might be a much greater volume of shoes. So in this instance, I might even observe the client's staff performing the stock take. And then what I would do as well is also make some sample counts. So that means that for items that the client has already counted, I would go in and I would count them again and compare them to make sure that the client was doing that information correctly. So there are some procedures that we've got for testing inventory. Remember, this is both a retail organization, they've got stores and they've got the warehouse. They need to check inventory in both of those locations. But one other thing to be aware of here is that we would need to be really wary of stock in transit, especially around the end of the financial year. So you might have stock that's left the warehouse on the 29th of June. It might not reach the store until the 2nd of July. It needs to be recorded and captured in some way. You might notice that I didn't really talk much about allocation. And so allocation is about whether items are current or non-current. With most of our shoes, we would expect our inventory to be current. So we only tend to see non-current inventory in a few different industries. So we might see non-current inventory in alcohol, specifically wine and spirits. We don't tend to see too much beer in terms of non-current inventory. If a company invests or collects art, that might be another one where you see some non-current inventory. But in most situations, inventory is current. So I hope you enjoyed our discussion on substantive tests for inventory. The key to this is practice. So making sure you understand the 4 rules, which I've talked about a number of times, and those 4 rules are: make sure that you use the correct audit terms, use the client names for the documentation, you're nice and specific about the test so that somebody could do it themselves, and that you match it to the correct assertion or to the correct control if you're controls testing. So I hope you found this informative, and keep an eye out for future videos on substantive testing. Have a great day.